every single resume you receive are all academic smart. What we are looking for is really creative people. In MultiPeak, we're always very keen on bringing on board, street smart people.
Welcome to the STEM Career Coach, hosted by Donnie McClary. Whether you're starting out or stepping up, this is your guide to growing in STEM.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the next episode of the STEM Career Coach. Today, I have Henry Maillet, the CEO of MultiPeak Global Innovation Lab, which is a startup incubator, and I'm very excited to have him on. Welcome, Henry.
Hey, thanks, Danny. Thanks for the invite.
Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your journey, mate?
Yeah, so my background, actually, I come from luxury and hospitality industry. 9 years ago, I decided to open MultiPeak. I'm one of the co-founders. And basically, MultiPeak has two platforms. We have a platform of Startup Accelerator, and then another platform with Innovation Lab.
Oh, wow. Two hats of the same coin. I love it. And could you tell us how, MultiPeak, kind of came to be? And what gaps did you see in the innovation ecosystem that I guess helped you, make that decision to, become a co-founder and start this journey?
Yeah, so actually I saw, few years back, I realized, when you are at school, people tell you, you need to specialize in one industry and know it very well. And I always been against it. And I realized that, not really against it, but it was not for me. And I realized it was the market of having an outsider that come into your industry who knows nothing, in fact. But I realized I had a lot of creativity, and I knew that what was happening in different industries. And I decided to bring technology into the picture. So basically, I saw patents, a lot of dormant patents that were developed and sit on the computer where nobody was using it. And I realized when you introduce them to different industry, they could have a use and just need a little tune, and this is where I saw a gap and decided to open MultiPeak.
Yeah, I think technology is a very strange thing in the sense that people don't really truly understand it unless you're a technologist and its capabilities or its implementations. I believe in our previous episode that you shared a story about a hotel brand that was, doing fitted bed sheets, and you were looking at the process and really deep diving into, how they did things and using your creative juices to essentially see how technology could really help them transform the way they were doing things. And I think education is probably a big part of that. And then explaining and translating a bit was probably something that you learned to get very good at very quick.
Yeah, I'd say this is a perfect example. You see, I think now when people are engineers, especially, then they are developing a new prototype, they don't spend enough time with the operation or the person that's using it. So the adoption rate is going to be very challenging, and the commercialization as well. To go back to the bed sheets, I tell you, actually, the way we think is we always start a prototyping or developing something out of a problem statement. So this is why MultiPeak, when we work with some big names and big hotel brands, we extract all their problem statements. We physically go there, we are on the field, we interview people, we look at the infrastructure. And out of this, there was this, in housekeeping who told me that changing bed sheets was a problem. So we say, okay, what is the problem? And basically, when they change a bed, they need to lift the mattress 8 times. They do 25 beds per day. It's king size bed. It's very heavy. And we managed to create a bed sheet that when you flip it over the bed, it would stick magnetically. And while people are sleeping, we can collect sleeping patterns. So out of a 2,000 room hotel, imagine they run a 90% occupancy, we will be able to collect so much data on the sleeping pattern with no name bases. That would be very interesting because we will know if people sleep better head facing north, south, east. Is it because of light pollution, sound pollution, quality of the mattress, color code in the design? So these are all the type of product, very disruptive. We know there is a market behind, and the key things is to bring famous brand to do the proof of concept with us on that.
Wow. And I bet, essentially you set one, I guess, solved one problem. And then all of a sudden you created a lot of information that potentially could answer all kinds of lists of problems, just basically using technology and merging it to solve one problem. And it kind of opens up a lot of doors and capabilities, it seems.
Yeah. And actually, you see, I think the key thing is to know all the industries. And this is why MultiPeak is not focused on one industry. We do every industry except fintech, but we don't believe in software. We believe that software will be taken by AI. So we have 5 years ago, we decided to really focus on hardware. I mean, hardware is nice. You can feed it, you can break it, you can open it, you
For
can.
sure.
Software is fully virtual, you don't really have hands-on, which I think, for us, hardware was the key thing.
Well, I think that's great instincts, I would call it, to kind of focus on the hardware side versus the software side, because the AI and just the tech evolution, it's hard to keep up. On these big giants, you just cannot compete. Essentially just you don't have the infrastructure and the support which you need. I would love, you've spoken a lot about, different, countries that you're partnering with, and your background is quite multicultural. I would love to know how you assess, for cultural fit when recruiting international talent or into local innovation lab, or even, talent that could potentially be plugged into the client or your partnership themselves.
This is a very sensitive subject, in fact, because you see, nowadays, every single resume you receive are all academic smart, and I think this is enough. I think, academic smart, we have, AI who already, help anyone, who is not academic smart. What we are looking for is really creative people, and who say creative, say empathy and compassion additional to it. So we, in MultiPeak, we're always very keen on bringing on board, street smart people. And where there is an industry where there is a lot of people like that, actually, is hospitality industry. People work very long hours, so in hospitality, usually they are not very well paid, so they want to get out of it. Those people have to make decision, for example, you work in the front office, you have very upset clients, and need a solution on the spot. You need somebody who don't need to think 2 hours to come up with a solution, it's immediate. So you need to have a network in place. You need, sometimes I have some sales people coming on board, and the first thing I do, I check when they come for interview is how many connections they have on LinkedIn. And sometimes they only have 2,000, so how can you be a salesperson, okay, full of academic, but you have only 2,000 network and not related to my industry in your network? It's a problem. So when we interview a lot of youngsters, we always try to tell them, you need to build your network, and you cannot step into a sales career, if you have zero network.
Very true. I would say, in recruitment, it's quite similar. I manage a team here in KL, supporting 3 different parts of the world. We got Middle East, we got Australia, New Zealand, Asia, including China, which is very different dynamics, very different stakeholders. And one of the things I kind of gravitated towards is people that, have goals, but also are fearless. It's kind of like what you said, a little bit of fearlessness, to ask questions. If they don't understand, they don't make assumptions. But most importantly, it is about pairing individuals with the circles that they would be with, and kind of matching personalities a little bit. But good people will always have a key role in every organization to me. But ones that I guess are a little bit more forthcoming, a little bit more fearless, and sales, as you mentioned, and recruitment is very similar. Those people tend to be the ones that do quite well.
Actually, also what I realized is that people who come from undeveloped countries, that's for me, they are the best because, they really think out of the box. They want to get out from where they are, usually, or they want to have a successful career. While when a country is well developed, they seems to be a little bit, over confident, and don't have same
Comfortable.
objective. Yes. So I think I quite like developing countries, because they are very visionary people. They really get things done. We always say, you close the door to them, they will open the window. Close the window, they will remove the tile from the roof and get in. So it's people like this we are looking for. In, I mean,
Absolutely.
we're hungry for.
For me, I always ask the question, what are your goals? Because there's nothing more scary than someone that has no goals and they're going to work for you. You're in, I guess, a highly dynamic environment with pressures, with, being pulled in every direction. And if someone doesn't have anything that's driving them, it's quite scary to me, but I like people that are, young families want to take care of theirs. Asian values are very big, of course, in Malaysia. So taking care of their parents, taking care of their elderly, and most importantly, people that have some goals for themselves. They don't just say, I just want to give everything away, but I want to do something for myself and, and look back and know that I accomplished something. It's similar to what you said. I think about, developing countries. You just have that mindset of that whatever you have to do to make it, you will do. And I think that type of resiliency will help you no matter what you do.
Yep. I notice also some interviews, when you ask, where do you want to be in 5 years, and people already, they don't dream about something big, they just say, oh, I think I'm going to be just a senior or a bit higher position after 5 years. But my second question is always, what about in 6, 7, 8 years, 10 years, 25 years? They are not prepared at all. And I always really suggest and encourage the youngsters, looking for a job, is to really have that roadmap written up, and
Oh, yeah.
with each steps, what they try to achieve, how much they don't even know how much a CEO earns in their industry. I think this should be a motivation, to when they get there, and how do you find the fastest way to get there?
Absolutely. And to me, it is very crucial when I guess we call it career mapping a bit. But, what is the end goal? And it can change and it should change. You shouldn't be the same person today as you are 3 years from now, ideally. But let's say the goal is the CEO. Okay, well, what do we need to do? You're at year 3 and we want to be at year 15. So you've got, 12 years in between. How do we make those steps, and get you prepared? And then most importantly, so it's almost a very easy transition. That's why I think goals are very important, because it's not the big goal is great, but you got to take those little bites and little steps to kind of get there. And you'll never become the CEO that you want to be if you don't kind of plan it out. Things don't fall in your lap. Some people it does. I've never been that lucky, but some people it does. But, it's always taking a lot of hard work, a lot of determination, a lot of sacrifice. And in order to do that, you kind of have to have an idea of kind of, what you're thinking and what direction you're heading in.
Even if people are not sure what they want to do, and if they're going to make a career switch or not, I mean, that roadmap can change. But as long as you write it down, and you have clear things of what you want to do, and I always suggest, don't move every year, like at least do 2 years each when you are young. And then the higher you get in the hierarchy, like as a CEO, you do like 5 years, 6 years, After 10 years in one company, unless it's your own one, I think it doesn't make sense neither, because, you get into a routine, the objectives are not the same. But in my teams before, I always make sure, that people leave every 2 years. So, and this is very positive when I say that, because I always tell them, I will employ you for 2 years. After 2 years, I will find you a job somewhere else. So I will recommend you to
Wow.
other CEOs. But
Such
2
a
years
great boss.
after, if you want to come back, you can, but you will come back with different perspective.
To be fair, loyalty is a very hard thing to build in this world. And, if I had a boss that told me that, you've been with me 2 years, you've been doing great work, I want to help find you something that I think would be a great next step for you in line with your career goals. I guarantee after those few years, because my future boss probably doesn't have that same mindset. If I am ever looking out, if I am ever looking for a change, I will run straight back, not walk, not text. I'll run straight back to that other boss that I had that took care of me and really, I guess, pushed me. Because loyalty is something you can't, replicate, and it's priceless, but it's something that actions speak louder than words. It is something that you can't say, but you have to do.
A lot of friends tell me, sometimes in the company I work, you never can live in the good terms. And I think this is a problem from the management, especially you see on exit interviews, people just trash everything, and I think this is totally wrong. I think, even as a CEO, if I want to get rid of someone, I can still find him a job, and try to change the perspective. It's not normal that people has to leave a company in the bad terms, and it's very difficult. And also don't forget in companies, the problem you have now, HR always cites the company good, but in fact, you already have the CEO, the CFO, the legal, are looking at the good of the company. If on top of that, the HR start to do the same, it's where, I see a discrepancy here, it's
Lopsided.
yeah.
And, I'm glad that you've, kind of mentioned a bit about leadership because it's very hard to find good leaders. And you've been very lucky, to work on portfolios of high networks, Asians within the region. I'm sure you have absorbed a lot from these individuals. And I'm curious, is there one leadership or innovation insight that you learned from operating with those individuals?
Yeah, I think it's just leading by example. I mean, we go back to always basics. I think all the CEO or colleagues I see,
Mm.
they are the last one to come in the office. They are the first one to go home. And when there is an issue, nobody wants to front it. So they let their junior to front this, and I think this is a totally, I would say, unacceptable. And you
Mhm.
surprised, if your turnover of staff is high. When I was in Beijing, I had quite a large team, and we had the lowest turnover ever, because I always make sure, we bring, we send them first of all to learn a lot of new things overseas, to train them, and they see me always the first one in the morning and the last one to go. So, and every time we had really issues to fix, with customers and clients, I'm the one doing it because in fact I like it. I think I like this challenge, and we ended most of the time having a coffee, and they completely forget about, their problem. And, it was very smooth. I probably could have upsell something else as well. So you see, is those things, I think it's getting lost.
I would say that it's just, I don't know. I think it's just a culture, just the times are changing. As you know, I spent 6 years in the U.S. Army, and leading by example, or as we called it, leading from the front, is something that I've embodied my entire career. Because if your boss is willing to do it, or your boss's boss's boss, is willing to do it, and that is the standard, and that is the culture that you're creating within the organization. That you work hard, you take what you do seriously, but also that you're there. You know, that's the kind of the reason why I don't really agree with 100% work from home, because the power of just walking over to someone and speaking to them, especially a senior leader or somebody that could answer it in 2 seconds and kind of put out a fire very quickly, is so powerful. And it also creates the culture of people being held accountable. Because loyalty, as I mentioned, and good leaders are very hard to come by. So when people find someone they really click with, typically, it's like you said, they might have to push them out because they'll never leave.
There is a lot of things you don't see, when like this on camera, but body language is one thing. The way we dress, the
Oh,
shoes you wear, are they polished or not? In hospitality industry, what I love to, is like we profile people. So straight away, somebody comes to you, you can see the character, you can see um, quite a lot of behaviors, that warns you, give you red flag, or tell you, okay, go ahead, and I think you see this is I found the hotel industry the best industry ever, because whatever you learn in a PhD, in hospitality, you have to practice it. And until you don't master it, you will not rank up, so that basically, if you come from, you have an MBA, and you are dropped into an operation field, you will make so much mistake because you have never practiced it. And
oh,
theory
for
and
sure.
practice, it's two worlds.
I have an MBA, so I won't take too much slight in in what you said. However, I always felt that a degree means that you are teachable. You have fundamentals. You kind of put the pieces together, you see the big picture, and that is great. However, without practical application and, knowing, parameters are very valuable in business. what does good look like? What does bad look like? And then you can kind of assess what's in between. But if you don't know those parameters, and if you're just dropped, into an organization, you're said, go, let's see, the learning curve would just be astronomical versus someone that had OG, on the job training, or someone that, essentially may work their way up and, knows what it feels like to, as we mentioned with the sheets, change the sheets, but also be the front desk that is firefighting. And then from there also, doing expansions and growing their career. That type of, it's worth much more than a degree. It just really is. However, we're in a society that we put a lot of weight on that. So it's great to hear from, a leader such as yourself that, it's a lot on capabilities. It's not all about degrees. And I know that's some hurdles you faced as well.
Depends also your industry. I mean, if you have a lot of procedures in your industry, I think you see when you have a large team and you have tons of procedures to follow in case things happen, it's always good also on day-to-day basis, to go through it, during morning, week, all this type of thing, because people tend to forget, and I think it's like company pillars, and the DNA of the company. Via Visio call it's very difficult to embed it into to emboss it, in people.
Absolutely. And, you're quite lucky, or you made this happen yourself, but, you're working with a lot of cutting edge technology, AI, robotics, ESG. How do you ensure your teams feel safe and comfortable to experiment, to fail in a lot of these, high stake environments?
I think this is the other side also of the software and versus hardware.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
I remember, in Europe, for example, in every home, we had a workshop. So your washing machine break. Your parents will put it in the garage. In garage you have all the tools. When you are young, you just unplug everything, think you're gonna repair it, but in fact, of course, it's to throw to garbage, right? But just the fact to take a screwdriver, and opening up, try to understand, see how it looks like this is where all starts, curiosity, So of course, I think we have to allow people to make mistakes and just move on, is it's quite normal for us, I don't think, people come and say, oh, thinking. I, when we work on coral farming, for example, we are working on this. We did a placements, on coral farms. So we saw that they use too many divers. Divers are expensive, it's dangerous, and they could not produce enough work underwater, plant coral. But we also noticed that they had too many PhD. And it's sad to say this, but we realized the more
It's not enough eBay and
the whole day they will keep on contradicting themselves, and nobody was taking a decision to at least try something, So when we stepped in, we had to narrow down a methodology, and because we wanted to file patents on. So we had to, I would say, to remove few scientists out of the picture because it was just too many, and we could not go anywhere, So this is just to find the right balance.
Absolutely. And I do feel it depends on what you're doing. There's a lot of situation based, how much failure you can deal with or how costly that failure can potentially be. There's a lot of mitigating circumstances, but really, to me, a great culture is one that speaks about failures to help understand, how this doesn't happen again. What were the lessons learned from that? And then from there, changing the way things are being done. I always love the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. So if you don't actually analyze the failure, analyze what's going on, what potentially could have changed the outcome, and, play with those parameters like you were discussing, then truly, that's where innovation comes from. But there is a mindset in technology that things cannot fail, that things cannot, I would say, go awry. But, I think it depends, industry to industry, but also, the leadership, like we mentioned earlier, a good leader can set the tone and embrace, those types of things where some people might have an opposite opinion.
The DNA of innovation to me is just taking risk and failure. If you don't go through this, you're not doing any innovation. So I agree with you. I think also people nowadays, they don't master the brainstorming session. So for example, this is what I was explaining, when we work on the prototype at the same table, we can bring somebody from space industry, from naval, from aeronautics, from agriculture, and plus we top it up with one or two scientists from different industry, and it's true, we really see it as an outsider perspective, trying to like a chef making a sauce, we play with
Absolutely.
flavors, and methods, and all of this, which is it's very interesting.
Absolutely. And I think it's a lot of visibility. One of the things that, just really resonates quite heavily with me in regards to yourself and your background and just the diverse, companies and problems that you're trying to solve is that kind of visibility is priceless from a sense that one day you're speaking, as you mentioned, the hotel industry. We talked about AI and robotics. We talked about, ESG or, with the coral reef project that you're working with as well. Seeing those problems and how those problems are being solved, or the I guess the critical thinking process, and then taking those tidbits and knowledge with you to each of the individual companies that you speak with and do partnerships with, I think is absolutely invaluable to putting pieces together, and really probably why MultiPeak has such a diverse portfolio, I would assume as well.
Yeah, yeah. It's sometimes we are not even asked, our opinion, because when we do an assessment, the company that we work for will give us their problem statement. And we always tell them, no, please keep it, don't come and pollute our mind. We want to fully see by ourselves, and we realize when we come up with our list and we compare with their list, is not the same. So there are
Mm,
we make a technology roadmap and see what they want to prioritize. I mean, they still are customers. But on our end, we will not do things that we know the adoption rate is not there, and
right,
is
right,
not key to us, we'll not do it. But we also try to prioritize technology that already exists that can solve a quick problem, even if it's not a big one, but it
yeah.
exists. Oh, and we gain a lot of credibility the first few months, which give us enough time to develop the more difficult prototype.
You
Because
have to start somewhere.
yeah, you
Yeah.
have to.
The problem I hear with technologists my entire career is understanding technology, the stakeholder management, the cross-cultural communication. Essentially it is about, getting that first bit of bandwidth, that first small project, that first bite of the pie to get that pique that interest. And then you can head down, the much grander scale of things and really can, as they say, go down the rabbit hole. But it has to start somewhere. And I think a lot of organizations, they're fearful of that first, they don't want to get it wrong. Everybody has so much, I guess, expectations when it comes to, innovation, especially. And, I think they think about it too much. And I think you would know much more about it than I would.
It's the same, when you have also quite a high turnover in our client's company. You have people who just arrive, wants to change everything, and yeah, it can be sometimes also challenging on that part. Do people stay long enough to see those prototypes also coming up? Plus, they have to sell it to their hierarchy, the VP. So if they start to shine over the VP, there's a lot of politics going on. So for us, we don't have this problem. As we said, we fully focus on our on solving problem.
The future within STEM is the brightest to me that it's ever been. We are at an amazing point in time where technology and industry is, just in the fast lane. What advice would you give, let's say, someone with, 3 to 5 years of experience in the STEM industry to really stay relevant, to, I would say, have a long, lucrative career within the STEM industries? What are some things that you would share with them to, put them in the right foot?
Travel. I think nowadays, especially in Singapore, for example, people uh, can become narrow-minded if they don't travel. And we say, in
Sure.
France, that traveling forge your career, forge your character. And I fully agree, because everywhere you move, you need to learn the new culture, make new friends, it's a lot of things to do actually when you
Yeah.
travel. A lot of things can happen to you, price management, risk management, So all these things, you need to master it and you will learn it there. So I think this equips you with a lot of skills that are needed. Um, and once you are married with kids, it's very difficult to travel. So I will really recommend that all people, once they finish their studies, it's just go and see the world. You will have time I mean, parents are very stressful on the kids, and stress the kids for their university degree, which I understand. My son's going through the same thing. Just travel. I think travel, there's difference also traveling, not going to Bali surfing, but going to
There's
work
nothing wrong with that.
2 years in one place, or 2 years in US, 2 years in Europe, 2 years in Africa, 2 years in Asia. I think this really gives you something that nobody has, a different vision, perspective, ideas.
I think it really shapes who you are. Like in America, we see adulthood at 18 is when you're officially an adult. However, I wouldn't say I was truly an adult until I was well into my 20s, mid 20s, late 20s. And one of the smartest things I ever did was join the military and get stationed in Korea. That whole adventure, as I like to call it, pushed me more than I've ever been pushed in my life. Moving to a place as an English speaker, to a country where, like Malaysia, it's not their first language. It's almost like you're playing charades every time you want to go somewhere. And it really pushed me to, there's two opposite opposing mindsets. Either you love it or you hate it. But most importantly, I showed myself that I can survive anywhere. People who don't even know my language, and I'm able to get that from point A to point B. It really pushed me very early on in my life and changed my entire trajectory. And then living in Malaysia, Singapore, I've been quite fortunate. And I honestly wish I would have done it earlier or sooner, and probably would have had been the version of Donnie I am today, that I wanted to be, opposed to, floating through life and kind of just, in my own bubble, when really there's so much more out there. And now I'm speaking to you in Malaysia, you're in Singapore, and we're talking about, our experiences, globally. I would have never thought in a million years. So that is fantastic advice. But you got to try. You just got to take the plunge. You got to really push yourself, not just professionally, but personally and for yourself as well.
When I was young, I worked on the cruise ship. And it was amazing because I did about 130 countries. I worked with more than 35 different nationality on board. I learned logistic because, when you're on the cruise ship, you need to have a full logistic for 14 days at sea. It's really a fantastic experience. I would really strongly suggest, even if it's not your industry, just take 2 years to go. I think you go to an interview, they say, oh, you have MBA, you have PhD, but why did you work on the cruise ship? I think, if you come up with this story, you wanted to see the world, understand culture, logistic, and put in practice what you learn at school, I think I would just give you the job because probably
I
you'll
think
be
they'd
the
be envious as well.
yeah.
And probably a bit envious.
So yeah, I think it's important. It's important to
I
travel.
think I
And
think there I think to me, one of the, I guess, the big themes that you kind of are, mentioning within the travel suggestion and, um, experiences is it's really, education is fantastic, but, who you are as a person, who you are, your morals, your values, and who you are, at the end of the day, when you close that office door is very, very important. Because regardless if you realize it or not, who you are as a person follows you everywhere you go.
it's
And the hardest workers are a lot of times some of the nicest individuals. They're the ones that are willing to help. But you don't just create those characteristics overnight. It takes a lot of hard work and determination. And traveling almost puts you into those situations that when you are done with that, the memories you have and the person you'll be after those experiences will forever be changed. And most importantly, I think perspective is what you're really going to gain. For an American, we think America is the greatest place on earth and everywhere else is just so different. But this can be further from the truth. I came to Malaysia, got in a grab or, a taxi. And then the guy was like, hey, mate, how are you from? And I'm like, and here I thought, it was just like Korea and Malaysia, there was no English, no anything. I was prepared, Google Translate, I was all good to go. And I was surprised, my mind was blown. We have these preconceived notions about every aspect of our lives. And I think the only way to reverse that or, do some corrective training is to, go in the deep end. And at the very least, like you said, I love how you gave him an interview question, by the way. I really appreciate that. I'm the recruiter, so it's up to the skill by job. But it's exactly right. You need to stand out. College applications, everybody needs to stick out now because the competition is fierce. You can do a CV, you can make your CV look perfect on AI, ChatGPT, you can use any resource and tool, but you cannot replace who you are. And I think that's amazing advice because who you bring to the table, I think is your greatest characteristic and greatest asset to any organization.
Second advice I would get also is people to always have a plan B. Because you see, if you look at your whole week, when you are like say in the 20s, you're going to work, find a job, work. But on the weekend, the weekend is very crucial to work on your plan B. Because you see, to be an entrepreneur, for example, when you come from corporate world, it's very difficult. They are very difficult to adapt. There's a
For
huge
sure.
failure here. But if you have become an entrepreneur on the manual things, for example, I'll give you an example. You buy sneakers, you tailor-make, customize sneakers and you sell it, Just exercise can also give you a new perspective in your day-to-day work. And in companies, you may have a new CEO, he bring all his friends. The next day you are without a job, And I think this is when you have a family to take care of, it's something, that you have to always anticipate. There is, I try to teach my son. So my son, actually, he goes from condominium to condominium, ask if there is abandoned bicycle, and then he refurbish them and sell them back, So it's
That's your
very,
son, mate. I love it. I love it. That's definitely your boy. I love it.
yeah. So we have like 12 bicycle at home that he's working on, like cleaning it, and he did a collaboration with a guy who's doing charity work in
Oh,
Singapore,
wow.
bicycle for free. So he's teaching him also how to fix.
Give back.
fix it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next thing I like those manual work because soon with AI, probably this would be will become gold assets.
The last one, yeah, that's the last one standing. No, you're not wrong, mate, for sure. I also, that advice is very interesting because, we saw this, through COVID, through the massive layoffs that were happening as far as ripple effects in different economies, being affected and having a plan B and at the very least changes the status quo that the job you do during the day has to be your dream job. This is something that everybody thinks I have to have my dream job. My day-to-day has to give me my purpose. If your day-to-day takes care of your family and it funds your true purpose, what you really want to do, I feel like that is a successful life. Do not put so much worth and weight into what you do during the day and what your 9 to 5 is. Don't be afraid to find your place, find what makes you tick. And startups, as you mentioned, it is about wearing many hats. It is about being agile, resilient, and most importantly, very adaptable. And when you have your own side business, when you do things for yourself, those skills, and I've actually placed people into startups that have side projects. So it's very funny that you mentioned this. And that was my entire selling point because everybody knows the cat's out of the bag. Corporate people with a lot of infrastructure and, layers within their organization typically don't last because they're just so out of the norm. If you can couple that with startup experience, what stable looks like and know that type of environment, let's not beat around the bush. Every startup eventually wants to get to that kind of organization or some version of it. Let's not say 100%, but having that mixed with the startup, you're going to be invaluable because that's the direction they're heading in. So don't be afraid to also make your startup experience on yourself. If you want to join a startup, if that's your dream to do, then guess what? You can make it happen yourself. You don't need to join a startup. You make your own startup, mate.
It is funny. We had when we opened MultiPeak, we had somebody who came on board who had a lawyer background and he knew he could not find a job. So he said, why don't you join us? And he knew some of the shareholders. And we one day I remember you say, let's do some calls, like a healthy companies when people are on the phone, orders are coming in.
Recruitment.
And he told me, no, this is not a job for me. I'm a lawyer, lawyer don't do this. And I thought, okay, like this goes nowhere because we need wires, you need to switch. You need to, don't take no for an answer. You need to do 150 calls a day if that's what it takes, to bring in 1 week time a contract. So I
Well,
think,
yeah.
it's, corporate is a different word. I understand what things I'm not good for corporate is those politics. I think the amount of politics that are generated is time you don't spend with your customer or for the good of the company. So this is a
Oh,
very interesting things, and I think this should be revised and brainstorm.
oh yeah. And, I really appreciate, your candidacy, your great advice. You really explained the why very, very well. So just to reiterate, I would say that travel, see the world, push yourselves, try to step out of your comfort zone, be a sponge, absorb those surroundings and those lessons learned along the way. They won't all be good. Some might be bad, but there will definitely be some great things and valuable things to add to the toolkit. And then 2, have a plan B. Life happens. We've all seen it. We've all experienced those types of things. And it is about, setting yourselves up because you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. It could be something big, it could be something small. But most importantly, try to figure something out because the last thing you want to do is to be reactive if anything happens. And who knows, you might have the next greatest idea and you might all of a sudden find yourself hiring people because you have something amazing happening and you need to look for individuals as well. And I can't thank you enough, Henry. I always learn something every time I speak with you, mate. Thank you so much for your time and always, giving back to the communities that we serve. We need, more leaders like you. And I can't thank you enough, mate.
Thanks. But forget the most important is to dream. People needs to dream.
Always. Oh, absolutely. So advice number 3 or 2A. Absolutely. Dream, come up with plans and just try and fail. That's okay. And at worst case scenario, you made some lessons learned, some good stories to tell that'll make your interviewer at least remember you at the end of that session.
Thanks, Donnie.
Thank you for listening to the STEM Career Coach with Donnie McClary. If you enjoyed today's episode, hit subscribe and stay tuned for more inspiring stories and actionable tips. Catch you next time.